Hello, everyone, and welcome to New York Shakespeare. We are here with a deep dive discussion. We are offering the latest installment in our series, our back to school series, where we are shining the spotlight on Shakespeare books and education. We have the distinct pleasure of being joined today by prominent scholar, educator, and writer Farah Karim-Cooper, all the way from the UK. Hello, Farah.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Certainly, certainly. For the past several weeks, New York Shakespeare has been focusing on education. We've been having discussions with different scholars and writers about Shakespeare education, Shakespeare books, and everything that we can about what we can learn in the process of being Shakespeare lovers, Shakespeare performers, Shakespeare educators, about different perspectives on Shakespeare. We've had a great number of discussions, and you can have a look back at those across our social media and connect with us, generally speaking, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Let's see what else, YouTube, WordPress, and more. Wherever there is social media, you can find New York Shakespeare. Connect with us, like us, friend us, follow us, whatever the verb is, the social media verb is for that platform. Connect with us on there and catch the latest of what is happening in the world of Shakespeare theatrically, and also our education series and all of our past discussions. So today we are here with Farah Karim-Cooper. Farah is one of the leading lights in the world of Shakespeare education, I'd like to think. She was from 2021 to 2022, the president of the prestigious Shakespeare Association of America, the SAA. She is currently the professor of Shakespeare Studies at King's College in London, and she is also the director of higher education and research at Shakespeare's Globe. These are all very, very lofty titles, Farah. How did you, and also perhaps most germane to today's discussion, she is the author of the wonderful new book, The Great White Bard, in which she discusses race in Shakespeare. So, Farah, this is a lot of amazing things. Uh, before we really dive into your book, which came out, I think, what, 3 4 months ago.
Back in August, yeah.
Back in August. Okay. Before we get into some of the details of your book and how you got into the exploration of race in Shakespeare, let's take a dive backwards in time and let's see how you got into Shakespeare. I was looking through your book, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. I highly recommend to our audience check it out, The Great White Bard. I was looking through your book, and even in the preface to the book, there's a really great discussion of how you got into Shakespeare. Do you want to give us a thumbnail summary of what that's about?
Sure, yes. Like most high school freshmen, I was introduced to Shakespeare when I was 15 years old in my English class. I found it kind of boring, actually, the way it was taught. And then the teacher put on a VHS, this tells you how long ago it was, of Franco Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet. And I was just completely bowled over. I just couldn't believe how fabulous it was. It was such a beautiful film. But also, I grew up in a Pakistani household, and I was really blown away by the fact that Shakespeare seemed to be speaking to an experience that I was familiar with in my family history. A young girl being told who she has to marry, and then deciding to go against her parents' wishes, and marry the love of her life. So it kind of encompassed the story of my grandmother, who was in an arranged marriage at a very young age. She was about 19. And she was terribly nervous, although she loved my grandfather all the way to the end of his life. It was a very anxious moment for her. And I remember thinking when she told me that story, oh my gosh, that's not how I'd want to live. And then I see this happening in a Shakespeare play at the age of 15, and thinking, oh my God, how does Shakespeare know about Pakistani women? Uh, and then my mom's story is very similar in that her parents, didn't want her to marry my dad, who was a divorced sea captain with 4 kids. And she's like, I'm doing it anyway. And she married him. It all turned out fine. But her sort of rebellious spirit going after what she loved, and my grandmother's story of, containment, was kind of encapsulated in Juliet and her circumstances.
That's amazing. That's an amazing connection. And I come from a similar background. My parents are from the Middle East. My parents are from Iran. So I
Mm,
have a similar kind of entry point where
mm,
it's I found some character that resonated with me, that even though it probably shouldn't or probably wouldn't,
mm.
somehow I made that connection and I was drawn in from that and the language and everything else. So you're drawn in as a teenager, as a 15-year-old. You see this connection. You see this identification of some part of yourself and your family history in Romeo and Juliet and in the text of Shakespeare. How do you go from being a teenager who's enthralled by Shakespeare to now, years later, to having these incredible positions, this incredible history with the bard?
Yeah, well, it was a pretty tough journey. I think high school didn't really sort of squeeze the joy out of Shakespeare, put the joy into Shakespeare, I should say. They might have squeezed the joy out of Shakespeare. So we studied Shakespeare and plays year after year, but it just the teaching in those days was just not really innovative. Um, so I just kind of lost interest in Shakespeare per se at that moment. And then I decided to major in English, because it's kind of a cliche story, but when I was in high school, when I was a senior in high school, we went to the movies one night and we saw Dead Poets Society, me and a group of friends. And I thought, oh gosh, I'd really love to teach English. And that took me back to Shakespeare. So I majored in English at Cal State Fullerton, and had some amazing teachers of Shakespeare. And they really sort of not just got me excited about it, but really got me curious intellectually about this world. And I took courses on Elizabethan and Jacobean drama, and started sort of writing about John Webster as an undergraduate and just getting really excited about it. So I then decided I wanted to study abroad, and I did a master's in Milton because I couldn't find a Shakespeare MA in 1995. And I studied at Royal Holloway, which is part of the University of London. And that was really tough because I found the academic system very, very different from the US. And also, there's a lot of gatekeeping in British academia in those days. So I felt sort of locked out in many ways. But I went ahead and applied for a PhD and did my PhD here, and started teaching at the Globe in about 2004 after I'd done some other teaching at different universities. And really, my journey at the Globe started, 2004, almost 20 years ago, which
Wow.
is alarming for me to have
That's
this revelation with you here now.
that's
But yeah,
incredible.
20 years.
That's incredible. And in that time, I'm sure you've moved from whatever position you started with there to now to being the head of higher education and research over there.
Yeah, I started out as a lecturer and then became head of research in 2008, and then took over the higher education program. At that time, we work with a lot of universities and drama schools, and we run an MA program and a PhD program as well. And so, stepped up into 2020 to the directorate.
That's fantastic. Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
And at the same time as you have this position at the Globe, you also teach at King's College in London. How do you keep a foot in both places?
Yeah, it's a challenge. But the King's College London has always been in the background, because when I was employed by the Globe in 2004, it was largely to teach the master's program, the MA in Shakespeare Studies, that we run jointly as two organizations.
Okay.
So it's a joint MA program. So the students will do 2 modules at the Globe, and then they do 2 modules at King's in a dissertation.
Okay.
So King's has always kind of been in the background. I started supervising PhD students there. And then in 2020, I was appointed a full professor. So I do some teaching. I've got PhD students, and we have a joint Shakespeare Center between King's and the Globe now, which we launched last year. And so I'm co-director of the Shakespeare Center.
So you're kind of the bridge between the two institutions in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my roles is to kind of keep the two institutions talking to each other.
That's fantastic. Well, that's quite a number of hats you wear. You have a wonderful bookcase behind you, and you have a bust of Shakespeare back there. And I'm
I
sure the
do.
bust of Shakespeare must be on a stack of hats because you wear so many hats in all these different roles.
Too many, too many.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And in the process of the ascent from your early days as a lecturer to this incredible dual position that you have now, this bridging of these different institutions, what were some of the difficulties or challenges that you faced on that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges was trying to be a sort of practicing academic while I was working in a performing arts organization in the education department. Because when I first got there, it wasn't really taken seriously as an academic organization. And so part of my goal when I started was to turn it into a research organization.
The
And so
Shakespeare School you're talking about.
Shakespeare's Globe, yeah. So we have this huge education program with lots of programs for young people, and we had, of course, university courses, but I really wanted to create an academic program as well. So that took quite a few years, and it was challenging. And I'm trying to do that without the infrastructure of, sabbaticals and research leave and that kind of thing. I had to continue writing books and taking part in peer review articles and conferences and, trying to be part of the academic community at the same time to give the Globe that academic credibility. So I wanted the Globe academic to be someone who can stand up with their peers and talk about the latest research in Shakespeare. And so that was the challenge, it was navigating those two worlds.
Now, the Shakespeare's Globe, you mentioned it prior to the work that you did and the development that you did there, building up and strengthening the academic program. What were the other major institutions that were considered the main academic programs at the time? Was it the King's College, or was it somewhere else?
Well, I mean, universities across the UK were, they were doing good Shakespeare work. There were a lot of Shakespeare scholars across the UK. But to have a sort of higher education and academic wing of a theater arts education department is very unusual. And so we now have 3 full-time resident academics working at the Globe. We have a research and collections department, a curator, and research is I think it's pretty much embedded in a lot of the work that happens across the Globe, whether it's the artistic program that you see on stage or the tours that tourists come in and do through the exhibition. Research feeds all of those different areas.
Well, that's fantastic. So, and you mentioned that in the process of building all this out and taking all the steps that you took, you also were writing articles and writing books. How many books do you have before The Great White Bard came out?
So I primarily published academic books. So I published 2 monographs, and then I published 5 collections of essays, 4 of them with collaborators. So I've collaborated with the great Andrew Gurr, who wrote the Shakespearean stage, and he was the main academic advisor on the original Globe Theatre reconstruction with Sam Wanamaker.
Wow.
So I collaborated with him. I've collaborated with Tiffany Stern on a book about special effects in Shakespearean drama and the senses. And then I published a collection of essays on Shakespeare's Globe, the first 10 years of performance. And then I did a collection of essays on Titus Andronicus. What is the latest research on that particular play? So I've done some really fun stuff.
Now we'll get into The Great White Bard in just a moment, but something you said a moment ago, you mentioned that one of the works that you contributed to was about special effects in Shakespeare. I don't know if our audience is going to hear anything in the background, but before we started, Farah mentioned to me that over in the UK it is currently Guy Fawkes Day, and there is fireworks and explosions going on in the background. So maybe this will contribute to the subsequent research.
100%. It's like being in the Globe in 1606 when they're doing a production of Macbeth, and you can hear the thunder. That's exactly what it sounds like.
Okay. All right. So now let's get to The Great White Bard, which you published in August a few months ago. How many years did it take you to put together this book, and what was the process of getting that all together, finding a publisher, getting it out there?
Well, I guess the best way to answer that is to start with why I decided to write it, because um, I'd been working in a public facing organization for a long time, but doing academic work. And part of my role is to make academic scholarship more accessible to the public. So we would do lots of events and festivals, and we invite scholars to come and give talks. And in 2017, I wanted to put together a festival on Shakespeare and race, because I felt like that was an academic conversation that wasn't getting into the public at all. And actually, I was really bothered by the fact that there were hardly any scholars of color practicing in the UK. I was one of maybe a handful. And certainly I'm the only Shakespeare professor of color. There's early modern professors of color, but I'm the only Shakespeare professor of color practicing in the UK right now.
Really?
And that, yeah. So I thought, well, what's going on? There's something going on here. So part of my work is also looking at the higher education system and the pipeline as well. So I wanted to tell the story about Shakespeare and race, because when I did this festival, I found that people didn't really understand why I was bringing Shakespeare and race into a conversation. And what did race have to do with Shakespeare? I was asked that repeatedly. And of course, they hadn't read, academic books by Kim Hall or Ayanna Thompson or Ian Smith, because those are in the academic realm. The books that are in the public realm are books that are sort of nice books about Shakespeare, right? Books that make us feel good about the bard.
Geographic books.
Yeah, and a lot of biography, and so I thought this is a book that needs to get out into the public domain. But I didn't want to do it in a way. I wanted to stress that, scholars of color who work on race, or all scholars who work on race, they're not doing it because they want to cancel Shakespeare, or they think Shakespeare's a racist, or they hate Shakespeare. They're doing it because they love the work too. They love the theater, and they love these texts. And so with that, it's, well, let's unpack this language that's really difficult. Let's think about how race making was something Shakespeare was aware of in his own time. Let's get rid of the myth that race is anachronistic when applied to Shakespeare's moment. And so I was really compelled by a lot of that work that was out there, and so wanted to contribute to that conversation myself, and then translate that conversation to a general readership. And so that's largely what the book tries to do.
And I think you find a really, really great balance of that, because there are definitely, as you say, there are Shakespeare books that are published out there that are really academic in nature, and it's difficult as someone who's not in that world to kind of decipher the language, or to get past that barrier of that not to say that it's dry academia, but it's academia. So it's written in a certain language, in a certain format for a certain audience, and that's not necessarily the same format that would be lend itself best to the general public. I think what you have here with The Great White Bard is a book that's really, really well researched and well thought out, but it expresses the ideas in a way that is more easily digestible by the regular Joe, or the people who are Shakespeare fans, but not necessarily academics.
Yeah. And I think I really wanted to stress that, look, Shakespeare's going to be okay by the time you get to the end of this book. Your love for Shakespeare might even be stronger, because you can see that he's navigating some of the really kind of high stakes issues of his day, and actually writing about things that we're still thinking about. And I think that was a crucial part of my intention, was to keep the sort of love for Shakespeare at the forefront as well.
So you discuss numerous specific characters, numerous plays. I think perhaps the one that would jump out to most people as the first one that would pop into people's heads is probably Othello, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think Othello does pop into people's heads as, oh, that's the race play. But what's really fascinating is, for years, academic orthodoxy was saying that actually this is not a play about race, and that actually the themes that are more important in this play are, jealousy, or domestic abuse, or military bonds, or Venetian history, even, when actually race is the context for a lot of the story. of that play, and the undeniability of Othello's identity and the position that he has in society. We seem to think that because he's in a high level position, a high stakes position in Venice, that somehow that means that race is not in the picture at all, that it's he's a kind of model minority, which is the name of my chapter on Othello.
Right.
But in actual fact, you can see all the kind of racist structures that are kind of surrounding him, not just Iago's rhetoric, but actually how it's built into the system that that sort of condemns him for his actions.
Right, absolutely. And I think even if you look at the language of the play, there are so many instances that where it's clearly there's the black and white, and it's right in your face. So why people would opt to obscure it or to look past it, I think it's a great issue that you raised to bring it to the forefront. Now, what are some of the other characters that you feel are the most prominent, or maybe some surprising characters that people might not immediately expect, but if they take a look at the Great White Bard, might be pleasantly surprised, or maybe have to recoil and think twice about why would this character be included?
Yeah. So I think, because I work within a theater, performance is just key for all of the work that I do. So I think about contemporary performance, but I also think very much in a parallel way about early modern performance. And then I kind of try to hold the performance histories of these plays in my mind. And so I was thinking a lot about Cleopatra, for example, and Antony and Cleopatra, which some people don't consider a race play, but actually all of us think very explicitly Shakespeare's thinking about racial difference, and he's thinking about what it means to be a woman of color in that kind of position, and also the kind of binaries in terms of imagery that he creates in that play are deeply racialized. Yet we've had we've had white Cleopatras in our performance history, and continue to have white Cleopatras. And there's so much debate out there about, the real Cleopatra was Greek, therefore she was not African. But Shakespeare himself refers to her as Black and then as tawny. And it feels strange to ignore that identification that he makes. And she's also referred to as Egypt several times. And we know that the Elizabethans thought of Egyptians as Black because of some of the writing around that time, which corroborates that. So what I wanted to do was kind of get people to think about Cleopatra kind of differently as a racialized character, as a minoritized character, even though she's a queen, and to think about how we identify Blackness and sexuality in this kind of space as derogatory, I suppose. So I kind of thought about the sort of modern idea of misogynoir in association with Cleopatra. And actually, if you think about the sort of frameworks for thinking about misogyny and racism, it applies so neatly to that play. So I really want people to think differently about Cleopatra.
When was Antony and Cleopatra released, or what kind of date do we have for that? Do we have?
So it's definitely Jacobean, so it's sort of around 1606, and some people say 1608.
Okay, so that's well after the when Shakespeare would be writing his sonnets. Do you see any parallel or any connection between the Dark Lady of the Sonnets and Cleopatra?
I'm not sure if there's a direct connection, but you can see across his canon a real interest in alternative modes of beauty, because the beauty standard in that time, which I wrote about in my first book on cosmetics, it was a sort of pale, luminous complexion with sort of golden blonde hair. It's very specific, very prescribed, and Shakespeare is constantly interrogating this one idea of beauty. And so racialized women show up at various points in his plays, from Hermia, who is shorter and darker than Helena in Midsummer Night's Dream, and is even referred to as Ethiop, which was a really derogatory term in those days. suggests that Shakespeare's thinking about this alternative and pitting the sort of perfect fair beauty against a more darker beauty, and suggesting alternatives for thinking about human love as well as beauty.
Now, in Shakespeare's day, London was very metropolitan. It was, in some ways, the crossroads of the world of that time. And there was increasingly people coming in from Italy and from different foreign locales. Does the influx of the foreigner, the other, the non-English person, does that factor into some of the racial modes that are expressed in his works?
I do believe so. I think, there's been a whole area of studies looking at Black presence in Shakespeare's England and prior to that. And so there's lots and lots of evidence for Black Africans and people from other parts of the world migrating to England and different parts of Europe from the Middle Ages, probably. And that history has been kind of whitewashed and somewhat denied. And actually, we can't deny it anymore because now we have all the evidence. And so it's hard to suggest that Shakespeare wasn't aware of the multicultural character of the city he was working in, and that he didn't encounter people from different parts of the world. And certainly, some theater historians have made connections between the theater and a Black silk weaver who was living in Southwark at the time. So it's really, really important to remember that Shakespeare's audience was not this homogenous, all white audience, and the city he lived in was vibrant and full of migrants and strangers, as they were referred to at that time. And so I think it did make its way into his work.
And absolutely, and you have Shakespeare speaking even within the context of the globe to so many different stratus levels of society. You have the groundlings, you have the middle class, and then you have the upper class, and then in some cases you have royalty. So he's really speaking to many different levels of society, and the fact that there could be racially different people or ethnically different people that are factored into there or that are becoming present in society, for that to be reflected in his works as a reflection of the stage being a reflection of what's happening in the contemporary world makes perfect sense. That he's playing on those hot button issues that are occurring around, from the page to the stage, so to speak. From today's news, ripped from the headlines to the stage, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right. So it's definitely a wonderful read. It's not something that you're going to sit and read and you're going to be confounded of, oh, I hate Shakespeare and Shakespeare. So it's really enlightening and wonderful and well written. And there's so much passion and so much love that you put into it and into drawing out the discussion. So I highly encourage the New York Shakespeare audience to get out there and check out The Great White Bard from Farah Karim-Cooper. Farah, if people want to connect with you on social media or to your online presence, what's the best way for people to connect to you and to find your book?
So you can find my book. You can actually get it from the Globe Shop, or you can buy it on Amazon. In the US, it's published by Viking Books. And it's called The Great White Bard, How to Love Shakespeare While Talking About Race. And I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn.
Okay, all right. So you can find Farah Karim-Cooper or Professor Farah K in some cases, I think, in some instances. But either way, connect with Farah Karim-Cooper, find her book, whether it's, as she said, on the Shakespeare's Globe website, on Amazon, The Great White Bard, a wonderful addition to your Shakespeare library, or the starting point, perhaps, to your Shakespeare library if you don't have one yet. But you should definitely check that out. Farah, I thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today and to contribute to our Spotlight on Education series. I wish you the best of luck and continued success with Shakespeare's Globe, with the King's College, and with everything else you're doing with the Great White Bard, and I'm sure whatever will be coming down the line. And I also urge you, stay inside, don't get outside in the fireworks and the insanity that's going on Guy Fawkes Day over there in the UK. But thank you again, Farah, and we hope to see you again in the future.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, New York Shakespeare audience, you heard it here. Farah Karim-Cooper, wonderful book, The Great White Bard. Go out and pick that up today. Connect with us across social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, WordPress, YouTube. Go back and check out all of our past recordings, our past Spotlight on Education series discussions, our past interviews. We have tons and tons of past discussions. It's all free. It's all on YouTube. It's all on Instagram. You can go check that all out. Connect, friend, like, follow, poke. That sounds scandalous. Poke, whatever the case might be. Connect with us across social media. And we always wrap up our discussions by saying, support your local Shakespeare, whatever that means for you, whether that's going out and catching a live theatrical performance, getting the latest book release, or whatever it is. Connect with your local Shakespeareans, support your local Shakespeare, and have a great day. We'll see you next time.